Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in what is bound to be a very interesting and hot topic around the shadowy world of qualification fraud and why it's a problem that just won't go away. I don't know about you, but I'm personally really looking forward to hearing from Chris about this particular issue and what is happening and what is continuing to challenge us. So I'm going to hand to Chris, and I will be here in the background should you need me. Thank you, Chris. I look forward to this topic.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much, Georgia. And good afternoon. Welcome everybody to this session. It's about qualification fraud, mainly degree fraud. That's our area of expertise, as I will explain shortly. But some of the principles apply to other qualifications, and there's a certain type of non-degree qualification that's becoming more and more problematic, which we'll look at in the course of this session. So much of what we'll talk about has its application across the board in education qualification fraud or any kind of formal qualification, but degrees are the particular area of interest for us. That is because that is Prospects Head, is a degree verification system, the official one actually for universities in the UK. And it enables the verification of UK degree holders. It's a service that we set up in 2011, and since then we've processed getting on for 1.5 million degree verifications. So that's our knowledge, that's our expertise, and out of that has become a lot of awareness of the problem of degree fraud, hence sessions like this. And what I'm going to do over the course of the hour that we have together is talk a little bit about the overall context of the degree fraud problem, and of course particularly its effect and the impact that it has on recruiters, employers, etc. We're then going to explore some of the characteristics of the degree fraud, shall we say industry, market, world, sphere, but it is an industry, and you'll see just how much of an industry it is as we go along. So we'll be looking at some examples of fake certificates. Then we're going to do a bit of a dive into the frankly endlessly fascinating rabbit hole world of fake universities, and there's so much material around those, but we can't do it justice even in the time that we've got, but we'll pick some highlights out and show you how some of them operate. We're then going to look at what might call the diploma problem, and that's what I mean when I'm talking about non-degree level qualifications, but those qualifications that are part of the higher education landscape, certainly, and why they are becoming more and more the focus of the fraudsters. That ties into some questions around things to do with credentials and accreditation, so we'll have a look at that. We'll then go into some case studies of high-profile fraudsters, people who've been actually convicted and gone to jail because they have lied on the CVs, including exaggerating or faking outright their degree qualifications. And then we'll also some less well-known ones, because this is a problem really that the tip of the iceberg is what people read about from time to time, but it's an issue that's going on all the time below the surface across the world. Then finally, a little look at the larger fraud spectrum in education, and some very positive steps that have been taken to mitigate the effects of that, particularly around essay mills, and you may be familiar with some of the work that's been done on that, but we'll have to look in more detail. And then finally, of course, what can you do about it? What can we all do about it? What is the best practice that we can put in place? How can we together fight degree fraud? And it is a battle, and you'll see as we go along just what the characteristics of that battle really are. But to begin with the world that we know of in the UK, this is some research by CIFAS, an organisation that, if you're not familiar with, I'd urge you to get acquainted. CIFAS specialise in issues around fraud and malpractice, especially around financial fraud, etc. One of the many services that they offer is a national fraud database, where instances of fraud that are experienced by employers can be logged and recorded, and members have access to that. So you can see if somebody has committed fraud in a company, or a fraudulent application, or been convicted of fraudulent activity. Their name is stored on the database, and it's a resource for other employers. They do a lot of research, and the most recent one they've done around degrees was earlier this year. And this is not unusual. These sorts of surveys are done. We've done them ourselves from time to time. This 1 in 11 people lying about their degree qualification out of the sample of more than 2,000 respondents that they had is not untypical. But I mean, that is a lot. That is a lot of people actually basically being either convicted, found, or admitted to doing it. And here's a big part of the problem, and this is where education and information comes in at a very early stage, actually, because we work with students around this before danger is likely to sort of develop. Some of them do not think it's illegal. Supplying false information on a job application, they don't realise that it is actually technically, legally fraud, and people can be prosecuted. They can lose their jobs for it, and they can sometimes go to prison for it. And CIFAS do a campaign aimed at younger people, students and graduates particularly, called "Don't Finish Your Career Before It Begins," or "Don't End Your Career Before It Begins," saying that the time-honoured thing, I'll just make up a little bit of work experience or give myself a higher grade than I've actually got. It's totally, obviously, for all sorts of reasons, it's completely out of order, and it can have very severe consequences. And then, as the survey also went on to establish the inclination that people might have for reporting colleagues who'd lied on their CVs. And again, there's not a general propensity to do that. There's a sort of feeling that people may cover up or indulge or look to one side when this sort of thing happens. And this is a theme that's been constant for years, and it's still going on. So that's a sobering view of the current landscape. Some research a few years back now, the first from stuff that we did, Head did with Credence, the screening agency, out of 55,000 CVs that we looked at, 15% had academic discrepancies, and the majority of those academic discrepancies were degree level misrepresentation or exaggerated grade inflation, as it's known. People giving themselves a 2-1 instead of a 2-2, or a first instead of a 2-1. Or there may be things around the sort of the nature of the work they'd done, the course that they'd studied, the university that they'd attended, or not. Both SMEs and larger firms, just under 50% of both, had experience with fake degrees. Around the same time, the ISE itself did a pulse survey that included some questions about verification behaviour. And this, again, it established what generally consistent ratios, actually, in proportions rather. So majority of employers, ISE members surveyed, asked to see a certificate or evidence of the degree, but only just over a third follow up with the only really proper check or step that you can take, which is to check the details on that certificate with the awarding body. So that's where degree verification comes in, and it's still, as far as we're concerned, and other people in the sector and the market and the industry, it's still a minority pursuit actually making that check. The idea being that for many employers it's enough to see the certificate, but as we'll shortly establish, there are many reasons why you cannot take all certificates or documentary evidence at face value. So the obvious ways in which employers or any kind of organisation, or universities too, are affected by fraud, well, it's terrible for your reputation potentially. And later on in this session, we'll look at some of the cases where the reflection upon the hiring firm or organisation, because they haven't done due diligence on incoming staff about the qualifications or other form of background checking, can be very, very bad. It reflects very badly on the firm, on the activities of the company. There may well be risks associated with intellectual property, brand associations, and the brand part ties in with reputation. Intellectual property, it can be, and there have been cases of this, where somebody who's entered a firm using false pretenses, their propensity for fraud doesn't stop there. In fact, actually, arguably, the faking your qualifications or exaggerating them or misrepresenting them, that is the key that unlocks the door into a company or organisation, which then enables other forms of fraud or theft to take place. So people might be working without the proper qualifications on sensitive, highly valuable intellectual or material property. They may be affected with the way that the brand is perceived. So all of that is imperiled if it's later discovered that that person is not basically who they said they were. The The effect on staff morale and well-being, this is again well documented. When you learn that a fellow worker is not who they say you are, that the company has not been rigorous enough and has let somebody like that into the company, that they may have been party or privy to sensitive confidential business practices or information, that does not go down well with co-workers, and it does have a very negative effect on general staff feeling and vibes. And then particularly the financial impact, cost of hiring, the cost of rehiring, all the time that is spent. I mean, in graduate recruitment or the recruitment of graduates, whether you're a major blue chip recruiter or a smaller concern that takes on early careers level workers, students and graduates, it's an expensive, necessarily expensive, time-consuming business. It requires a lot of attention, a lot of commitment, and a lot of budget, and that can all be thrown away when an individual who's entered that route, through that route, is discovered later on that they do not have the degree that they said they had, or don't have any degree at all, or it's from a made-up university or with a fake certificate. The cost of rehiring is significant. You have to do it all over again, and the most recent data we have, again, it goes back a couple of years or so. This is some research done by Axelos. Well, you can see for yourself. I mean, 40% in the survey that they undertook of companies spending more than 10,000 in the previous 3 years rehiring after employing someone who lied about the qualifications. That's a lot of companies in that survey. And 9% of them spending more than 40,000, because obviously, you know, the higher up the levels you go, the more senior the appointment, the more expensive the headhunting, the scouting, the onboarding, the salaries, etc. If you don't get it right at that level, then of course it's extremely expensive. But it's expensive however you cut it. It's money wasted. And half of those in the survey, as you would expect given the outcomes of the survey, said they did not always check candidates' qualifications. And finally, on sort of the cost side of it, this is from the ONS survey they did, found, well, of 138,000 HR managers in the directory, 14% of them dealing with at least 5 instances of employees not holding the certifications they claimed. That might be degrees, it might be professional body membership, it might be chartered institutes, it might be safety critical qualifications and certification. And as a point at the end makes, that number could be even higher if more employers made checks. It's that kind of unreported crime thing, isn't it? I mean, these are only known about where the checks have been made. If the checks are not being made comprehensively, if it's only a minority of employers doing it, then of course you can extrapolate and suggest that there is a whole world of fraud going on that employers aren't necessarily even aware of, though in some cases they might suspect it based upon performance. We'll move on to fake certificates, because the certificate is whether it be presented digitally or in print, however it's mediated or produced, the certificate is the sort of the action point around how so much of how this fraud works. There will always be, in this sort of crime, a certificate somewhere or a transcript or sort of letter of some sort, but some official looking document. And this is from this morning, a Google search for buy degree certificates online. And this is, again, the tip of the iceberg. There are multiple online entities selling fake degree certificates or versions of real world degree certificates or diplomas or any kind of educational qualification. So we search for degrees. If we were to search for diplomas on their own, probably for A-levels, for GCSEs, for chartered institute membership of chartered institutes and bodies, etc. It's absolutely prolific, and some of these, including the most realistic fake university certificate in the UK, it's a tall claim, but some of their produce, depending on how much you're prepared to pay for it, will be of reasonably good quality. It won't necessarily fool everybody, but we've certainly worked with universities who've encountered a fake certificate, and they've told us that the quality was so good, right down to holograms and watermarks, that they had to really spend some time checking its authenticity. And sometimes the fake certificate is so good that the only thing that gives it away will be something like an error made in like the vice chancellor, for example, wasn't there at the time with the date on the certificate, or there was a different registrar or something like that. But at the high end of it, if you buy a whole package of degrees, transcripts, doctorates, masters, undergraduate, the lot, can cost a few £100. You can equally pay £5 or £6 online for a reasonably good certificate that will pass muster. We once did a test purchase on eBay for a degree or doctorate, in fact, in rocket science from the University of Manchester, and got by return post, very, very beautifully produced. Very, very good looking, got the crest right, got everything else. Some details that, you know, an expert eye, an informed eye would have rejected, but and that was, I think, £6.95 via eBay. Incidentally, eBay over the years has periodically been infested by these sorts of fake providers. They often work to eliminate them from the platforms, and it's the same with Amazon. But it's like mushrooms after rain. As soon as you get rid of one set of them, new ones appear, because the trade in this is global, and it's extremely profitable. And I should say at this point that the UK has the dubious honour of being one of the most faked higher education systems in the world, because of the obvious cachet and good reputation of UK higher education. Of course, it's a highly lucrative market to defraud. So the UK, along with other sectors in Australia, for example, the United States particularly, it's a dubious honour. It's a perverse tribute, really, to the quality of UK higher education, that there's so much fakery going on. We work with, let me just move on to the next slide, universities a lot around this, as well as employers. So when we set up HEAD in 2011, it was fundamentally as an efficiency saving service to provide a central portal for inquirers, third parties, employers, screening agencies, embassies, other universities, to make checks against the university's data. And that's where it's become a very important service. But as soon as we started it, we became a repository. It was like a reservoir slowly filling up. We became a repository for reports on fake universities and fake certificates, and we'd get examples sent to us by employers or by universities as well. Or they might say, "Well, I've not heard of this university. It doesn't look right. Can you look into it for us?" So we built up this reporting service, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. But we did a survey earlier this year with some of our university partners in advance of Qualification Fraud Awareness Week, which is a programme of online events and real world events, once again, happily as well, where we look at issues around degree fraud and qualification fraud and best practice. So we asked some of our university partners, a big number of them, has your institution ever encountered a fake degree certificate? Because we believe, we're not quite 100% with the evidence base for this, but we're well on the way. We believe that for every real university, there is a shadow version. So I included the word shadowy in the title of this as a shadow alternative version, a mirror reflection, if you like, of the real institution, trading sometimes with a variety of slightly different names, or sometimes just out and out, like the University of Manchester rocket science PhD certificate, trading out and out on the real credentials of the real thing. So we asked them if they'd ever encountered a fake degree certificate. 45% of those who we surveyed said they had. Just 6% said they hadn't. And then the rest answered don't know. And that's extrapolating too much. I think, well, it's one of those situations where you should know either way. And if you don't know, it's probably because there aren't the rigorous checks in place, or there aren't the sort of degree fraud mitigation policies necessarily. Or maybe, they don't have access necessarily to the parts of the institution that deal with it. But it suggests an uncertainty, around half of them, and just under half actually saying they have encountered fake degree certificates. And again, it's typical of the work of universities. They are places where they will receive examples from the outside world of versions of degree certificates for their graduates, or they're sending their graduates out into the job market and into further study, armed and equipped with a qualification and the proof of that qualification. Somewhere along the line, fake versions are being created. And we do a campaign every year for students and graduates. And it's one of those regrettable things that you shouldn't have to do, because it's a bit of a killjoy exercise, but it's dead important. It's under this sort of headline, don't take a selfie of your degree certificate, because it's the most natural thing in the world, obviously, when somebody gets awarded the degree. You see it so often on social media, a picture of the degree, and so proud, just received my degree certificate, 3 years hard work, fantastic achievement. And it's a lovely thing to do. But sadly, that natural human impulse going all over social media, the fraudsters are just waiting for those pictures to go up, because what that does, it provides an immediate gallery of the latest degree certificate styles, of the way in which the wording is arranged, of where the crests are. So it gives a whole set of material for people who immediately start churning out fake versions. And worse, from the individual point of view, it enables identity theft. Very, very quickly, that can be turned into a digital asset for somebody taking the names and details of that person and using it for bad purposes. So it's a highly risky thing. So we do address that. I suppose our line is, you wouldn't put a picture of your passport, your driver's license, or your NHS card or anything else up online. Treat a degree certificate as sensitive personal information, because it's very valuable to the person who's been awarded it, but it's just as valuable as an asset to the people who are out there in the world seeking to defraud it. So fake certificates are a huge part of the world of degree fraud, and that led us to, amongst other things, developing a degree fraud reporting service. We did it informally to begin with, and then in 2015 it was taken over, I suppose, for want of a better term, by the Department for Education, and then subsequently by the Office for Students, because it was recognised around that time, around 2015, there's a big drive in higher education, and the media picked up on this, and in government as well, to start clamping down on degree fraud. And it was understood that it had associations with other types of fraud and financial crime in particular, and issues around visas, etc. It all became a very, very hot issue, and it's ebbed a little bit and flowed a little bit over time in terms of the intensity of it. But the degree fraud reporting service is still going on today. We now run it within JISC as part of the head service. But over the years, we've investigated more than 300 fake universities, and we've helped shut down around 80 of them. And by help shut down, I mean we've worked with, for example, the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, and sometimes with domain providers, and sometimes with trading standards, or with authorities in other countries, to drive what is almost always the internet entity, which is perpetrating the fraud, out of business or out of operation. We've never had a case where there've been raids upon bricks and mortar fake universities, because they very rarely exist like that. Although there are some instances in the world where there are physical establishments, but almost entirely in the world that we deal in, and the world that affects people the most, these are online entities. So we shut them down. But of course, again, with that mushrooms after rain analogy, they do tend to pop up again. And you can sometimes see the same provider trading under a slightly different identity, but using the same kind of materials and structures and language as they were previously. And interestingly, on the head database, and the head database, I should add, is fundamentally a database of institutions that are able to award degrees, and that ties in with the head database, or institutions that deliver higher education and their degrees are awarded by another body. So they're legitimate degree awarding or degree delivering entities. And we also have a sort of family tree structure on there. So, and this helps clarify things. So if someone is going for a job with a degree certificate from Manchester Polytechnic, and the employer, not unreasonably, is not aware of Manchester Polytechnic because it ceased to exist in 1992, head will tell them that those degrees are now awarded by Manchester Metropolitan University, which is the legacy institution from Manchester Polytechnic, and the same for all others. And some of them are more arcane, where the original institution is just not known of at all these days. So that's really useful. But despite all of that really important real world data, we've got many more fake universities on the head database. They are crossed out in red, highlighted in red, and it says, this is not a legitimate degree awarding institution, which is a slightly diplomatic way of saying it's a fake university. In almost every case, that is what they are. But our degree fraud reporting service, it's a very, very important corollary to the work we do on HEAD. We always want to receive reports from, and if any of you at any time have any doubts whatsoever about a certificate that you've seen as a recruiter, a university you've encountered, or not necessarily things that are out and out fraud, and we'll come on to this in a short while. If you're just not quite sure what the status is of an awarding body or where it sits in the scheme of things, we can help you bring clarity to those often thorny questions. And I should say that these are issues that are more difficult and more pressing the further beyond the borders of the UK you go, where knowledge and awareness, quite understandably, of the UK system and the industry and the sector isn't strong. That's where this sort of standard information is really necessary. So before we move into looking at some actual detail of how these entities operate, we identified a long time ago what we call the vicious circle of degree fraud, and it's a self-perpetuating cycle, and it's also sometimes what referred to as a fraud gap. So if we just think back to some of that data that we looked at, where by the ISE survey, only 35% of its members at that time were actively checking degree certificates with the awarding body. In that case, it's a 65% fraud gap opportunity. So where there's low awareness of fraud and the risk, let's say amongst recruiters, amongst government, amongst organisations, amongst employers of any kind, where there may be low awareness of the ability to check awards. It might be something that people feel they should do, but don't know how to go about doing it, etc. The reliance on certificates and CVs, quite understandably, because that is the evidence base that you have still, whether that be digital or whether that be print or anything else, or incidentally on the veracity and reliability of what the individual tells you about themselves. That's all goes into the sort of the trust profile, if you like. So because of this, the low awareness and the reliance on documentations, etc., and the reliance on assumed trust, dishonest applicants take advantage of it. They know that the likelihood or the possibility is worth taking the chance on. And in many cases, that belief is vindicated. They get away with fraud. And it all goes back into feeding the cycle. At the end of the session, we'll have a look at the virtuous circle of verification, which is the natural answer and solution to all of that. But this is pretty much how it works. It's rooted in low levels of awareness, low levels of best practice in many cases, and a minority, and I really should stress this, it's a minority of students or graduates who do this. I mean, and the vast majority of students and graduates who are impacted or are part of the degree fraud world, they're sadly unwitting victims. They enter into, in good faith and all conscience, transactions with education institutions which are not legitimate and are set up to defraud them. And we're going to look at an example of that shortly. But there are some who don't, and that is a reality. And again, we'll share some examples of that later on. Everything is upside down, the title says. I don't want you to turn yourselves upside down to read it, but I was very late, because I always am. I'm a very late adopter on various things in like television and culture. So only recently started watching Stranger Things, which I thought was brilliant. I saw the first series. I haven't seen any others, but it was really, really good. And I absolutely loved the idea of the upside down, that shadow alter world that is totally adjacent and interwoven with the real one, which some of the characters step in and out of, and it has some of the trappings of the real world, but of course it's a terrible, grim, dark, miserable, dangerous place. I don't want to stretch the analogy too far, but certainly there is an upside down, a shadow world, an alternate universe of fake universities, fake versions of real universities. Then what I'm kind of ironically calling real fake universities, i.e. they're only fake. They have no corollary in the real world. They're fundamental 100% upside down universities, and fake certificates and fake transcripts and fake letters of recommendation and fake everything, including fake references. We'll save that bit to the end, but fake work references, as well as fake certificates, as well as fake transcripts, an entirely fake alternate world that is existing and frankly thriving just over our shoulders, and we shall step into it as we go along, starting with the misuse, the shadowy misuse of names. So the University of Manchester, as most of us will know for sure, is the university entity of Manchester, along with Manchester Metropolitan University, and then just down the road, Salford University, and so on. Now, the Manchester University, the University of Manchester, rather, has to be spelled with a capital T. It's not University of Manchester, it's the University of Manchester. But very commonly, people will say, I went to Manchester University. And quite right, when they say that, they mean they went to the University of Manchester. But as a university name, Manchester University does not exist. So if you ever see a certificate or document with Manchester University on it, and a degree award, and a qualification, etc., that will be fake. Manchester University does not exist. It's the University of Manchester. So that's an example of common parlance speech turning into like an identity, institution identity. It happens a lot with University of. So University of Surrey. Surrey University, there's a load of fake certificates in circulation still from Surrey University. And they and the Manchester University ones will mimic the real crests and the real layout, and they do this. I don't know if plausible deniability is the word, but it's a way of saying no, we've not really mimicked the real university, we're calling it something else. It's a novelty, it's a fake degree certificate novelty, which is obviously totally bogus. But then extensions on the theme we've come across, and these are all on the head database. Greater Manchester University, that was a very sly one, because the University of Salford's tagline a while back was a Greater Manchester University, which is a nice way of saying it's in Greater Manchester, but also it's greater as well. But of course, that has just been misused as Greater Manchester University. Manchester Union University, presumably something to do with the Students' Union, and then Manchester Open University. Now, the Open University has premises in Manchester. So you might say, I went to the Open University in Manchester. Somebody might even say, I went to the Manchester Open University. But there it is. It's appeared on fake certificates. There's been a fake website devoted to all of these institutions. So that's just 4 examples out of one real-world university. A very, very high-profile case, actually, going back a couple of years now, was and a perfect example, if you like, of how a real university is imitated and misused in order to extract money from unwitting students. And there's some very sad human stories around this one. So Newcastle International University, it emerged in the way that volcanic islands emerge out of nowhere and then disappear just almost as quickly. It emerged around the time of enrollment and registration for the academic year, and it was an online entity operated overseas, but it succeeded in persuading a large number of international students to part with hefty enrollment fees and deposits and registration fees, because they were purporting to be the international arm of Newcastle University, and this is the homepage, and they borrowed a lot of the artwork and the material and the content and the design and structure of the real Newcastle University, and it was set up in very, very comprehensively. The website had depth to it. It wasn't just a couple of like landing pages, so it did give a very, very powerful impression of being the international arm of Newcastle University. And sadly, tragically, actually, a few students turned up at the real Newcastle University in enrollment week, fully expecting to take the places on the course. And of course, they had to be told, I'm sorry, you have not registered with us and enrolled with us. You've been the victims of a very sophisticated scam. And of course, by the time the penny dropped with people, the fraudsters had pocketed the money, closed up the operation and gone. But that's a very, it's not extreme, but it's a very particular example of how that kind of fraud works in practice. But we also get universities who don't necessarily have a real world equivalent or corollary. This is one that we investigated earlier this year called Finch University. And it's a peculiar one because, like a lot of these entities, it's not clear when you look at it where it's supposed to be established. So a lot about this website suggested it was from America. It was like an American private university. It may have been an online-only university, but it also had British associations. It trades on an idea of being a legitimate British higher education provider, and will sometimes have British addresses that you can try and follow up. And in this case, Finch University, which changed the spelling of Finch within a few pages and put an E in it, so it suggests like very sloppy creation. It does claim to be based in London, but it's used some content from London Metropolitan University. So these are really, really strange. And that's why I said there's a lot of weirdness and strangeness about the way that these online, almost entirely online, fake universities or dodgy universities are set up. And sometimes it's casualness about the way that they go about doing it. So in this case, it's sloppy. They're not even consistent in how they spell the fake university. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to matter that much, apart from offending pedants and scrupulous grammar people. They still succeed in persuading students that they are legitimate, or maybe they are a way in which an unscrupulous student can buy a qualification cheaply. They don't need necessarily to go into that much depth and detail or get it right all the time. But I think Finch University is still around, despite it being reported. This was one of a very, very big scam for a few years, and this one's almost certainly now defunct. But just in terms of like the taxonomy of fake university names, so we have the real universities or versions of a real university. And then we get fake universities based in real counties that don't have a university. And actually aren't that many of those. But Rutland, well, it's a ceremonial county, isn't it? But it has a county identity. And it's a very old part of England, right at the heart of England. But Rutland was given its own fake university by this outfit. And it was apparently the world's #1 online university and had been operating for more than a decade when the scam came to big public attention. It goes heavy on scholarships and exclusive scholarships and financial support, because the more sophisticated of these fake universities package up the entire pseudo-academic, pseudo-coursework, fake qualification, fake transcript, and funding opportunities. But as we shall see, funding, of course, is nothing of the sort. It's a trap. So what Rutland University did, they did a mass email of students in many different countries, a mass email purporting to be from an education recruitment agency, which they called London Recruiters, delightedly announcing that the target, the subject of the email, the recipient, was eligible, as they put it, for a major scholarship with a top online university covering 95% of the tuition fees. And they offered all sorts of discounts, saying that they could enroll for this exclusive MBA at Rutland University in the heart of England, the UK's or the world's #1 online university, for more than 10 years. And they could enroll on that for just £699. And there was a lot of pressure on them to complete the application form to secure the scholarship, which sadly many, many students did, and found out when they realized they weren't getting any coursework, or maybe they did get some coursework, but it was of such a banal low level and so of such poor quality that maybe the penny dropped then, or maybe some of them even went through a whole program of pseudo coursework. But it's likely that the scam was just to get the money in the pockets of the institution, the fake institution, and off they went. Interestingly, the Rutland University used a lot of content from the University of Leicester, which is obviously near to the fictitious Rutland University, and actually made a real academic in a real department, I think in the Department of Economics. They made that person the Vice Chancellor as well, which they didn't know about until the scam was investigated. But they had pictures of him and everything, and lots of other faculty members from the University of Leicester. So it was a completely shameless exercise, but not untypical. And also, incidentally, you may not see it on here, but they claim that their courses are accredited by something called the British Distance Learning Association, which is a totally fictitious body. None of the website phone numbers work, nothing else worked. The only thing that did work and was real about this was the e-commerce mechanism, which extracted £699 from the bank accounts of some very unwitting poor students. So that was another big example of a very well organised scam. They're not all as well organised as that. This one's just going back to the taxonomy question. We've had a university, a made-up university in a real county. Well, this is a made-up university in a made-up county. So I'm sure everybody on the call will know that there is no such place as Riggshire. But referring back to that point made about the knowledge of the UK higher education system and the UK market, similarly, outside of the UK, and frankly inside the UK too. I mean, geography isn't everybody's strong point, but certainly the further outside the UK you go, you can't be expected to know intimately what is and what isn't a real British county or shire. And Riggshire, it sounds English. It sounds like it might be in the Chilterns somewhere, or one of the home counties. But anyway, Riggshire traded for quite a while, and again it was awarding certificates for a fee, and there are people out there in the world, like there are from all of these entities, with Riggshire degree certificates. It's Vice-Chancellor, and they went to the trouble of, they didn't fake a real person, but they used some stock imagery of a wise-looking man looking thoughtfully at the camera. But the Vice-Chancellor, fake Vice-Chancellor, cooked up a message to encourage people taking part in the Riggshire University experience. And I think this is like a lovely example of like corporate gobbledygook, because actually it's sort of plausible. It's saying the sorts of things that you sometimes see on corporate websites or business people talk about, saying things like, as the upcoming years will certainly be more competitive and inspiring, we need to continue to be relevant and maintain our performance for continuous improvement. With common vision and strong cooperation, we shall attain brilliance. Keep up the good effort and stay competitive. I mean, no one could argue with those sentiments at all, but they're also utterly meaningless as well. And they sign off as Alston Gresley Baronets, Vice-Chancellor of Riggshire University. And this one in particular, we like this example because it really embodied, the website itself was beautiful in the way that it really traded on ideas about Britishness, actually particularly Englishness. Some of the pictures of the campus and the accommodation, none of which existed obviously, were like country houses or lakes or people boating, and it had a very sort of dreamy English county old-fashioned feel about it. So that, of course, and a crest for Riggshire, which looks like a county crest from somewhere in England. So it gave all these impressions and associations. You're very beguiling, and of course that kind of works in partnership with real marketing for the UK, for British Council for Higher Education, which does trade on multiple ideas of what Britishness are, obviously not as narrow as this, or as old-fashioned as this, but it would have struck a note with many people. And I don't think anybody turned up at looking for Riggshire and was disappointed to find it didn't exist. But if they had have done, the main campus building actually is the rear of a car park of some serviced office units in Aberdeen. So it would have been disappointing. It certainly doesn't match how they set themselves up on their website. But that's Riggshire. And before we leave, and it's one of hundreds of fake universities we've got in our database, but before we leave, have to give a shout out to the all-time favourite, and nothing's ever trumped this one, as it were, Brexit University, which emerged around the time of the EU referendum. But this is just perfect, and this was quite a well-developed site actually, and it offered fake courses and fake certificates, and you could enrol in it and probably had to pay through the nose to do it. But yeah, Brexit University has remained, as it were, the number one fake name that we've come across in all the years. We've come across some fantastic ones, but this for sheer effrontery and brass neck, but also for very sensible timeliness. It takes some beating. So a short guide tour through the Rogues Gallery. I want to talk about a very important but related topic, which is problems that we have with higher level qualifications. So Degrees, you'll know this, I'm sure, they're tightly regulated. The UK higher education system is very diverse, and you've got multiple types of institution, and there are always arguments about equivalence and quality and all of that. But there are institutions and agencies which deal with all of that. So a degree is a known quantity. You cannot just up and award a degree legitimately. You cannot just call yourself a university legitimately. You need to have permission to do that, even if you're using it as a trading name outside of academia. But also at higher education levels, postgraduate certificates and diplomas, they are not subject to the same kind of rigor, scrutiny, or anything else. And actually, it's relatively easy. Any one of us right now on this session could set ourselves up as a postgraduate level training provider by registering at Companies House, by getting a UK Register of Learning Providers number. And then after that, it's pretty much you're on your way, and there is no scrutiny, monitoring, no quality assessment, no auditing, and certainly nothing around finances. I want to look at an example which is a model example for this. I want to be very clear, I'm not imputing anything illegal about this firm that we're looking at, HRODC, whatsoever, other than to say it trades in an area of ambiguity, as many and in fact an increasing number of providers do trade in, because diplomas are easier to set up, they're easier to deliver, and it offers richer pickings for the unscrupulous, but also for the scrupulous too. There are issues around clarity. So on the homepage of this entity, it describes itself as a postgraduate only institution. Now that immediately makes you think it's a postgraduate teaching institution, it's a postgraduate level education, and in your mind the word postgrad study, master's, diploma start to sort of get fixed. And it claims to be verified by and registered with the Department for Education. It's an insanely fascinating learning provider, this company. This is up to number 12 of 246 hugely comprehensive courses and programs, almost all of them purporting to be leading to a postgraduate diploma. 246 in pretty much every area of business activity, industrial activity, commerce, etc., professional practice, imaginable, engineering, financial, HR, marketing. I mean, it just goes across the board. And just as extravagant as the depth and detail of it are the fees. So we've highlighted one in yellow here. This is not the only program which costs, on the face of it, whether these rates are actually negotiable, and they may well be, but on the face of it in their prospectus, £45,000 for 3 months worth of study. Other more economical ones can be delivered in 5 days for £5,000. But the problem with this is, particularly for students, and students do take part in these programs, and there's lots of the learning videos on YouTube where the delivery appears to be a lot of people sitting in a room listening to a man go through line by line on PowerPoint slides. It's extraordinarily sort of old-fashioned, if you like, or rote rather, teaching methods. But many students do enroll. The problem is, how does a student know that the £45,000 that they might be paying, or even the 15 or 20 for the more economical ones, how do they know that postgraduate diploma, how do they know how that stacks up with a postgraduate diploma offered by a real accredited university in the UK, typical fees ranging between 5,000 and 7,000? How do they know how to compare the two things and make an informed judgment about where they should study and how they should study? Because on the face of it, all diplomas are equal in that respect. Now, obviously, they're not at all in practice, but people don't necessarily know that. And then from an employer's point of view, when presented by a graduate who's going for a job or somebody with a qualification, I've got a PG diploma in human resource management, did a practitioner's approach PG program, it led to a PG diploma, etc. It sounds fantastic. It was with a specialist postgraduate training institute. Great. If you take that at face value, then and you don't check or you don't look into it any further, you may have recruited somebody who actually doesn't have the same level of technical knowledge and training that they would have had on a similar course delivered by a university or an accredited higher education provider. Possibly, it's speculation, but that is where the ambiguity comes into it. And this UK RLP, comes up a lot, but in this case, it doesn't mean anything other than you've registered. It's like registering with Companies House. Beyond that, it's not about monitoring or assessment or auditing. It means that you've registered. And once that's done, you're in the system. And actually, in this case, when you look up the live UK RLP website, it turns out that this particular one was deactivated. So shades of ambiguity, trading on spurious credentials. So we mentioned the Register of Learning Providers, Companies House, again, doesn't mean anything about the probity, the quality of your company, the markets. It says nothing about you other than you've gone through a registration process. And of course, you have to go through requirements to sort of provide accounts, etc. But from an education provision point of view, a Companies House registration is utterly meaningless. It just says you've set up as a company. And then real university and accreditation and partnership connections, these are often used. We investigated a college earlier this year, which again, a legal entity, but making claims that it was in partnership with at least 3 real universities. And when we contacted those universities to ask them about their relationship, they denied, said they had no connection with them and they'd never heard of it. And they were going to be writing straight away to this college. It was a business college in London, to ask them to take off. But on the face of it, looking at the homepage, you think, oh, it's great. They're working with the University of X and the University of Y. They must be good. And maybe they're accrediting their programs. And then also, red flags very often on these sort of uncertain, ambiguous diploma providers or further study providers, when they plaster the websites like a Formula One car with United Nations, NHS flags, British Council, Ofsted, companies, etc. It often means they're just trying to bolster their pseudo credentials. We've had a good case of this recently with the Leeds International College, which is a wholly fake institution. It doesn't have any physical premises as such, but it has a strong online presence. And again, like many of these others, it claims to have the best UK accredited study programs. It's the Leeds International College, which is based in London. It's got nothing to do with Leeds whatsoever, as far as we can tell. And in fact, the picture of the supposed faculty or main administration building is in Lisbon. So it's Leeds, London and Lisbon. And in none of those places is it a real thing. But here's another example of the accreditation that is misused. All these either non-existent or have no meaning. So authentication by the UK government legal notification office. In this case, there's no such thing as an accreditation for this body with any such organisation. It's not been ratified by Her Majesty's representative in the UK government. That's totally unsupported and unsupportable, and so on and so on. All of these things have no meaning, but they look impressive to the untutored eye. And what that also means is if you have an untutored eye, you wouldn't necessarily be looking for where they're really established. But in this case, their address leads to a post mailbox set up in Holborn in London underneath that scaffolding. And then their register on Companies House, well, they have 2 arms of the business and a charitable side, allegedly. They're both registered at neighbouring houses in Leicester. So the L thing crops up again. So it's Leeds, London, Lisbon and Leicester. And then the claims made on the website for accreditation, it proudly talks about its license number from the British government, which is its company's registration. So all of these things, where they exist at all, go back to a very simple fact about setting up a business, which has got no bearing on anything to do, especially with it being an education provider. But the most difficult areas, and the ones that are most important for our purposes, are where claims are made for accrediting and awarding degrees. That is the key thing to establish with any kind of institution that you're not sure about, and that can be done by checking with the Office for Students Register, and also something called the Listed Bodies Register, which has been managed by the government, usually by the DFE. That tells you who is a university and who isn't, and who has the right to deliver higher education programs, because not everybody does, and it all has to be done properly and in an accredited way. So we'll move on from the actual instances and have a quick look at some of the headlines that have taken place, because having mentioned that tip of the iceberg thing, periodically the degree fraud and qualification fraud does become a big hot media topic and a big hot political topic. When it isn't a hot topic, it doesn't mean it's gone away. but there are sometimes cases that are so high profile that they force attention, which is a very, very useful period, because that's when more people get informed and educated about the depth and danger of the issue. But this staggering trade in fake degrees revealed was around in the wake of a huge case going back to 2015, but it's still, the repercussions of this are still being felt in Pakistan, particularly where it took place, but elsewhere in the world. This is a company called Exact, which is a proper publicly trading legitimate company, a software company, I think it was, but they had a massive sideline in running fake universities, diploma mills, very, very well-produced ones, with an e-commerce infrastructure for selling certificates, selling transcripts, taking registrations, etc. And this was busted by international cooperation from the press, including the New York Times. Interpol were involved at one time, and it became a huge issue in Pakistan where people went to jail, but also it was there was a lot of other corruption that came to light as a result of this. But this was like a huge stone dropped in the lake of degree fraud, and the ripples keep on sort of coming out from the centre. It's a sort of the poster case of how deeply and how lucratively degree fraud can be undertaken as an industry. But it's not the only case whatsoever. And headlines from over the years, a couple of these illustrate the fact that it's very, very common. Degree fraud or qualification fraud generally is often only exposed as a result of financial malfeasance in companies or organisations. So a con man posing as a vicar, or a fraudster who scammed from the NHS and had fake army medals, and sometimes delusional people or fantasists about their history. They'll fake qualifications or fake experience to support that, but almost always there's a financial aspect to it as well. When I mentioned before about the qualification unlocks the door, that gets people into organisations and into firms where they can start. It may be expenses fraud, it may be financial fraud, it may be channeling money into other accounts. It could be any sorts of malfeasance in a company. But these headlines are with us all the time. But the most high profile and the worst, this is an absolutely dreadful case. You may well have seen this because it's been in the press twice, actually. This woman, Zolia Alemi, who was jailed originally in, I think, 2018, because it came to light that as a result of forging and making changes to the will of a vulnerable elderly person in Cumbria, for whom she was a consultant psychiatrist, that was detected. The investigation then established, horrifyingly, that this senior psychiatrist who worked in the NHS since the mid-90s, was a consultant as well, had no educational qualifications. And what had happened was she'd come to the UK in the 90s from New Zealand at a time when there was an arrangement with the GMC where qualifications from other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth were given a sort of put through a separate sort of checking process. And I think basically they'd taken at face value some very dodgy looking documents, and it hadn't been very, very rigorous in the way that she was checked, because clearly they hadn't established her bona fides at all. They'd taken at face value some very poor quality looking documentation. So she got into the system and it just went from bad to worse. And so she served a sentence for that particular case, but then a case was brought against her again for more general forgery and fraud. And in Manchester earlier this year, she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. But it's a terrible case because sometimes it's important to keep some proportion. It's never right that somebody should go into an organisation or company on fake pretend qualifications on principle, and it's unfair on everybody, particularly unfair on students and graduates who've worked for their degree and may lose out on getting a job for somebody who's bought something from eBay or faked their certificate, etc. But there aren't always life or death consequences, however serious it might be. But in this case, she was prescribing courses of treatment, strong medication for people with psychiatric problems and illnesses. People were, took her into their trust, and she was responsible for treatment policy. It's a dreadful case, and would have been obviated. None of this would have happened if her qualifications had been checked properly at the start. The NHS crops up quite frequently because I think it's a high target employer for fraudsters. So a number of the big press coverage stories over the years, including this person, Philip Knight, who faked a degree in classics to get a job as Chief Information and Digital Officer at Oxford University's NHS Foundation Trust. Because notwithstanding that previous case, clinical entry into the NHS, qualifications, of course, are checked rigorously and properly through the General Medical Council, but non-clinical, it's patchier. And that's why a number of cases, this was a very, very high profile one, John Andrews, who I think I've lost count of the number of fake qualifications, but he had at least one undergraduate qualification, a master's and a PhD and an MBA. He lied about his work experience as well. He'd started out working as a builder and then worked in various other professions and trades and industries, but not at the level that he got to in the NHS, all based upon fake qualifications. And he earned more than £1 million actually in a 10-year career and got to a very, very senior position. And actually, when he was tried for this, he admitted to tinkering, as it was described, with his daughter's degree certificate as well. So it's just like a serial fraudster and forger who went a long way before it was detected. I should just mention, with the NHS, they've very recently introduced a fit and proper persons framework for doing much more comprehensive checks on non-clinical staff, and that's a really, really positive step. And that's a model for any other safety critical, well, any industry really, but any other safety critical high risk industry, whether that be in civil engineering, in the nuclear industry, in hazardous waste. And certainly the NHS cannot be letting people in to make decisions and policy who do not have the qualifications that they properly require. This case, somebody in Manchester quite a few years ago now, again, his degree fraud, his qualification fraud, came to light after a massive expense claim swindle that he undertook. I think he defrauded them about £50,000, his employer in Manchester. And again, if the firm had just checked with Manchester Metropolitan University, which is only down the road, when he joined them, they'd have found out that he did not have an MA in human resource management or any other kind of qualification. Huge case of confidence trickstering going on here. This man called David Scott, he not only faked his engineering qualifications, but he claimed to be an expert in the screen grab reads non-parametric regression for analysis of complex surveys and geographic visualization. He stole that from a namesake academic and added it to his list of credentials. And it was only when colleagues realized that, why is this person managing this complex oil and gas installation in Kazakhstan when he clearly has no aptitude or competence? That was when questions were asked. Similar questions should have been asked sooner about Daniel Mithinkulu in South Africa. He was the chief engineer of the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa. He faked 6 qualifications, including diplomas and a master's degree from the University of Witwatersrand. He had no qualifications whatsoever for job, literally and in practice as well, because he was the head of engineering and oversaw and approved a 2.6 billion rand contract for 25 diesel trains and 45 electric locomotives that were too tall for the South African rail network. The specifications were all wrong. It was a massive case in South Africa, and again a model of where the consequences were, huge, because they hadn't checked his qualifications. And finally, a case about South East Coast Ambulance Service driver. The judge in this case came down really heavily on the employer, saying it was absolutely scandalous that they didn't make the right checks, that all of this could have been obviated, would never have happened, because this person had made up multiple qualifications and work experience as well. And like many of them, went to jail. We've never come across somebody pretending to be a graduate at a graduation ceremony, and this is a bizarre case. I suppose because it was revealed and the person was arrested in the tracks, as it were, or stopped in the tracks, they didn't go on to then fake a certificate and then try and enter the labour market. But I think there was a strange one. I think it was somebody who'd told their family that they were at university and sustained this for several years, and then had to get somehow into the degree ceremony, which is it's a desperate plight to be in. And degree education or any kind of education shouldn't be that important that you pretend to attend a graduation. But say if this had not been uncovered, almost certainly they would have then tried to buy a fake LSE degree certificate and will probably be trying to get a job by now. All of these are headline news stories and many, many others. We have many, many other cases where they don't hit the headlines. Just dealing with this one, we had a call on our fraud line from a charity in Canada, very concerned because they were checking one of their directors' degree credentials as part of a routine sort of spot check. They'd never heard of Marylebone University. And of course, we were able to tell them immediately that it doesn't exist at all. Didn't need much sleuthing, and that's because Sherlock Holmes lives in Marylebone. It's so obviously fake, and the degree certificate is a very old-fashioned. You don't see this type of certificate as much anymore. But the person concerned had claimed to have done a 6-week online Masters in Zoology, and then phoned us up on the Monday when it was clear that the game was up. Firstly, kind of going on the attack being the best ones we've had, saying that they believe they've been the victim of a scam and it was outrageous and they wanted to sort it out. But obviously, as the penny dropped with them, the reality of it, they realised they'd been found out, and of course they lost the job. The charity also discovered that all of their work experience had been faked as well, but they'd had many other jobs before that, highly senior and well paid, and had been in this company, this charity, for several months before they figured it out. It's all part of what we call the full spectrum of fraud, or the fraud spectrum, leading to where people are getting jobs under false pretenses, fake personal statements, fake funding applications, fake coursework, fake qualifications. All of these things add up to a total fraud spectrum. I mentioned references. Reed found that 1% of candidates had used a reference house, and this was new to us. So there are now not only fake universities, but there are reference houses that will make up companies for you to go with your fake qualifications, etc. And Reed at the moment are flagging 1 to 2 cases a week. SA Mills, and I'm rushing this now because I do apologise because we're really up to time. SA Mill crackdown, the first major step in tackling the fraud spectrum. Doesn't mean it's all gone away, but it's much harder now to trade as an SA Mill. So that's one part of the spectrum which is very, very hard to carry out, and it's very hard for students to get away with anymore. We hope that qualification fraud will become just as rigorously enforced as we go on. What we can all do about it, and you as recruiters especially, it's dead obvious. Verify all incoming graduates. Tell them that you do this, put a degree for qualification for a policy in place. We can help you with that because we produce toolkits on it. And report instances of fraud and cheating. Let us know if you come across a case that you're not sure about. Tell SciFast where we've reported it, to report it to the police, because it is a criminal act if you choose to take it to that level. And then finally, the virtuous circle of degree verification goes without saying. The more awareness there is, the more best practice there is, the more verification there is, the greater awareness, and so on and so forth. If you recruit and verify every time, it makes it very hard. It makes it less lucrative. Degree fraud will become much less desirable for the fraudsters to go into, and unscrupulous candidates will realise there really is nowhere to hide. And that is the end of the slides. And I see Georgia there, and thank you for your patience. And if you have any questions, perhaps we have some time to take them, or should we wrap up now?
We have gone slightly over time, Chris, but thank you so much for that fascinating run through. I haven't actually seen any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. However, if you do have a question for Chris, maybe if you're okay, Chris, people can get in contact with us afterwards and we can pass the questions along. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
We welcome them, yeah.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. A fantastic webinar here today. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And as we say, any questions, please do let us know. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.